What if the only thing standing between you and God's purpose is the lie that you are weak? Have you ever felt too small for something big? Too small to prosper, to lead, to overcome, to change your own story? As if everyone around you seemed more prepared, stronger, more confident, and you were the exception, the unlikely one, the person no one would bet on. There is a kind of quiet inferiority that never shows up in photos, but eats away from the inside, making you believe you were born to stay hidden while others move forward. And the strangest part is that many times, it isn't a lack of effort. You try, you work, you pray, you wait. But the sense of not being enough is still there, like an invisible weight. It's like living with the constant impression that God chooses extraordinary people, and you didn't make the list. Little by little, the mind begins to build a dangerous narrative. I'm not capable. I'm not important. I'm not the right person. This Bible story is for anyone who feels weak, diminished, carries a deep inferiority complex, and has come to believe they are weak or incapable because of the difficult circumstances they've lived through. But here is something almost no one notices. The Bible is filled with people who felt exactly like that. Unlikely people, insecure, hidden, exhausted, afraid, and yet still chosen. Because God does not operate by the human logic of competence, appearance, or position. He sees potential where you see only limitation. He calls you by destiny, not by your current condition. And among these stories, there is one of the most surprising and encouraging in Scripture, the story of Gideon. Gideon was the son of Joash, from the tribe of Manasseh, an ordinary man from a family considered small and insignificant in Israel. In that time, the people were living under the oppression of the Midianites, cruel enemies who invaded the land, destroyed the crops, and carried off the food, leaving everyone on the edge of famine. Out of fear of these constant attacks, Gideon was hiding in a winepress, a place used to tread grapes, trying to thresh wheat in secret so he wouldn't be seen. It wasn't cowardice without a reason. It was survival after years of terror. And it is exactly in this setting of fear, scarcity, and a sense of powerlessness that something unexpected happens. God appears, not to rebuke the man in hiding, but to reveal who he could become, beginning the first step of that transformation, called in the middle of fear. In Judges 6:11-12, Gideon was not on a battlefield, and he was not in a place of honor. He was hiding, threshing wheat in a winepress, trying to save a little food from the Midianite enemies. It was an act of survival, not courage. And it is exactly there, in the place of insecurity and fear, that the angel of the Lord appears and calls him something that seemed completely distant from reality. The Lord is with you, mighty warrior. Gideon didn't see himself that way. In his own eyes, he was the least and the weakest family of the tribe. But God did not speak based on what he felt. He spoke based on what he knew Gideon would become. In many people's lives, meeting God also happens behind the scenes of insecurity, when no one is watching and when self-worth is low. How many times does someone feel too small, too incapable, too far behind compared to others? And yet, it is in that quiet place that God begins to rebuild identity. It's not uncommon to feel far from God, at the very moment he is closer than ever, working on something that still isn't visible. And that raises a question that leads into the next moment of the story. What happens when God calls you to something great, but all you can see are your own limitations, the battle within himself? Gideon doesn't respond to the calling with excitement, but with questions loaded with pain and frustration. He recalls the stories about God's deeds in the past and asks why none of that seemed to be happening now. Then he reveals what was really behind his resistance. My clan is the weakest, and I am the least in my Father's house. It wasn't only humility. It was a deep sense of inadequacy. Gideon believed his background, his position, and his own personal self-image disqualified him completely. In his eyes, God must have mistaken the person. What happens to Gideon is deeply human. Many people live trapped in constant comparison, feeling like there is always someone more prepared, stronger, more worthy. That quiet sense of not belonging rises up, of always being one step behind, as if life were a line and everyone moved forward while you remain in the same place. It's like being given an opportunity, and instead of joy, feeling fear of being found out as someone who isn't enough. And yet the story shows something powerful. Insecurity does not cancel the calling, but it can delay the response. And that sets up an important reflection for the next moment. What does God do when you ask for signs because you still can't fully trust what He said? Courage born in the dark. In Judges 6:25-27, God gives Gideon a delicate and dangerous assignment: to tear down the altar of Baal that belonged to his own father and to cut down the sacred pole beside it. This wasn't only a religious act. It was a direct confrontation with the idolatry inside his own household and the entire community. Gideon obeys, but the text reveals a very human detail. He does it at night because he was afraid of the men of the city. It wasn't a heroic act in front of applause. It was a quiet decision made in the dark. Even trembling, he chose to obey. This biblical story shows us something deeply encouraging for anyone who thinks only perfect faith pleases God. Many times, transformation begins with small steps, discreet, almost invisible to others. It's like making a hard decision in silence, changing a habit, ending something no one sees. But that changes everything on the inside. It wasn't the absence of fear that moved Gideon. It was the decision to act in spite of it. And that raises an important question for the next moment of the story. What happens when God begins to use someone who still feels fragile, but has already decided to take the first step? When God reduces resources to increase faith, Gideon is no longer alone or hiding. Now, he has an army of 32,000 men, a number that, humanly speaking, seemed enough to face the Midianites. But then something unexpected happens. God says they are too many. One by one, the soldiers are dismissed until only 300 men remain. This wasn't loss by accident. It was an intentional reduction. God was teaching that the victory would not come from human strength, but from trust in Him. This story reveals something deep, because there are moments when, after you take a step of faith, it feels like everything gets harder instead of easier. Resources shrink, support disappears, responsibilities increase, and a sense of being far too exposed rises up. It's as if the safeties are removed to reveal where trust really is. God doesn't need impressive numbers, social status, or a perfect structure to act. And that raises a powerful question for what comes next. What happens when you realize you have nowhere left to lean except on God? When God strengthens the one who is still afraid. In Judges 7:9-11, on the night before the battle, God sees what no one else could see. Gideon's heart was still trembling. Even after the calling, the signs, and the reduction of the army, the fear had not completely disappeared. So the Lord does not rebuke him or expose him. He offers help. He tells Gideon to go down quietly to the enemy camp and listen to what was being said there. It was a deep act of care. God did not demand perfect courage. He provided encouragement before the confrontation. Many times, a person believes that if they still feel fear, it's a sign of weakness or a lack of faith. But the account shows the exact opposite. God knows our fragilities and works within them. Sometimes strengthening comes through a conversation, a word, an unexpected confirmation, something that arrives at the exact moment to hold the heart up. It isn't spectacle, it's personal care. And that prepares the ground for the next moment of the story. What changes inside someone when fear still exists, but trust begins to rise higher than it? When God wins battles you could never win. In Judges 7:19-22, the scene is almost unbelievable. There are no swords raised, no conventional military strategy. Only 300 men with torches hidden inside jars, trumpets in their hands, and an unusual command. At the exact moment, they smash the jars, lift the lights, and blow the trumpets. And panic overtakes the enemy army, which falls into confusion and begins to fight against itself. The victory did not come from Gideon's strength, but from God's direct intervention. It was a battle won before it even began. What this biblical story reveals for today is that there are situations where a person knows they don't have enough resources, influence, or ability to change the outcome. And yet, something happens in an unexpected way. Doors open without explanation. Problems resolve through unlikely paths. Results appear far beyond human effort. It's like witnessing an ending greater than any planning could ever produce. And that raises a silent question that leads into the next step. What happens inside someone after experiencing a victory that can only be attributed to God, discovering that God had already strengthened you? Gideon, who began hidden, insecure, and full of questions, now leads Israel into deliverance. It wasn't only a military victory. It was an inner transformation. The man who doubted his own ability became an instrument of liberation for an entire people. God didn't just defeat the enemy. He built a leader through the process. Strength didn't appear overnight. It was formed step by step as Gideon obeyed, even while trembling. This speaks directly to the experience of many people today. There are seasons when a person only realizes how much they've matured when they look back and see everything they made it through. Situations that seemed unbearable were endured. Fears that felt paralyzing were faced. Hard days were lived one day at a time. It's like someone who survives a storm and only afterward realizes they learned how to swim while the waves kept coming. And then a question rises, preparing the close of this journey. If God has sustained you this far, what else can He still do through you from here? God doesn't look for ready-made heroes. He forms heroes in the process. Gideon didn't start as a hero. He was hiding, afraid, trying to survive in silence, not believing he could be used for anything great. He questioned, hesitated, asked for signs, obeyed while trembling, but he didn't run from the calling. And that is exactly what changes the whole story. God did not wait for him to feel ready, confident, or strong. God met him as he was and walked with him until strength began to appear. The transformation didn't happen before the calling. It happened during obedience. This story reveals something freeing for anyone who feels insufficient today. The problem was never feeling fear, feeling small, or thinking you're not prepared. The danger is using that as an excuse not to take the next step. How many people live hidden behind busyness, distractions, or excuses because they believe they don't have what it takes? And yet God continues to call ordinary people to do extraordinary things because the strength doesn't come from them. It comes from Him. Maybe you're not facing an army, but you're fighting insecurity, comparison, anxiety, or the feeling of not being enough. And deep down, the question that remains is simple and profound. Where have you been hiding? What decision do you know you need to make, but you keep postponing because you're afraid of failing? Gideon's story shows that God doesn't require perfection to begin. He asks for availability. One step at a time is enough for Him to act. The strength God sees in you is greater than the weakness you feel. And many times, the greatest miracle isn't the external victory. It's discovering who you can become when you choose to trust and step out of hiding. Invitation to a brief prayer. If you can, pause for a moment now. Slow down, close your eyes, and lift your thoughts to God. You don't need beautiful words. Just place in His hands the fear, the insecurity, and everything that feels heavy inside you. Let this prayer speak for you and strengthen your heart. If this message spoke to you, write in the comments, "Even afraid, I will go." This story doesn't end here. There are other messages on the channel that can renew your faith and strengthen your heart. Keep watching.